Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank for what is for us a very special interview. It was actually our first interview that we conducted back in the summer, but up until now, we just really haven't known the best way to put this out, due mainly to the fact that we didn't really know what our style was going to be at the very beginning. So we've changed things around a little bit. We've thought about what to do, and we hope that you really enjoy an interview with someone who we think is a legend of our movement, particularly in the Northeast. So this interview is with Heather Wood. And we start off in our normal way with me asking, what is socialism to you?
I think the way I was brought up made me a socialist because I lived in what was basically a socialist society. Because mining villages, we looked after our own. The union, for instance, the men paid into the union extra money each week to provide a doctor. So we had our own, not when I was alive, but we'd had our own doctor, we had our own parks that the union bought, we had a welfare hall where, to all intents and purposes, that's where we had the youth club as such. Mind you, that was just because our welfare hall has supposedly the best dance floor in Europe, the best sprung dance floor. And because of that, us young people could only use a very small square of that. So about a dozen of us used to go there twice a week and would be stood next to the stage, and our record player was on the stage, the record player was on the stage, and we had to, because the space was so small, we had to take turns who could dance. Mainly it was bopping, but that was the welfare hall paid for by the miners. Everything we did, we went on trips every year, trips that were organised by the clubs. The members would pay subs into the clubs that would save them up, and we had, well, Easington would empty on the days of the club trips because the buses lined the main street. Everybody whose dad was in the club, and each club had a different day for their trip, and Easington would empty and we'd go to Redcar, Whitley Bay, Whitby, just for the day. And that was, so you did everything as one big family. And the good thing, you knew everybody in the street. You knew everybody in the colliery and everybody knew you. And sometimes that wasn't good, because if you did something wrong, your dad found out at the pit and then you got into trouble. But if somebody was bad, somebody else would help them out. If somebody was a bit short, somebody would be there. So that was the sort of closed environment in one sense. That was the extent of my socialism growing up. It was in the colliery village, sharing, caring, mutual respect, love for each other. And this is where I'd like to tell you one of my theories is I have this thing about three worlds. I don't know if I've told you about it before, but there's the world underground that my dad used to tell me about. And he would say, Heather, it's a different world. You sometimes you rely on your mates for your safety, but sometimes you even rely on your pony for your safety, because the ponies could hear the coal moving before the human ear. So you relied on your mates and the animals that were down there. So that was one world. I had a different language down the pit, and that's where they would say it was called pitmatic. I'm Ganyem, that was pitmatic. And if I talked pitmatic, my dad would go light, would go berserk. But that was one world. The next world to me was the above ground world, which was the women and the children. And looking back, I think then I realised just how important it was being a community that cared for each other. Because I remember seeing men dying of emphysema, pneumoconiosis, chronic bronchitis, all those things associated with mining. But the community came together, the union came together and fought for those men. Took them until the 70s and 80s to do it, in the 90s, but they fought for them. But also, so we knew the dangers. I knew, for instance, that my dad had never met his own dad, because my dad was 10 months old when my granddad was killed at Shotton Pit. I knew because one of my good friends at school, when we were about 12, her dad was killed at the pit. I knew because I'd seen my granddad, my step-granddad, die of pneumoconiosis. To see all those things makes you respect life and respect each other much more, I think. So there was always this, like, there was a busyness in the woman's world. She would never stop. Yet in our house, my mum never stopped outside the house. She kept everything going. She got involved in politics. But so there was like the middle world, what you call the middle world. And then there was what I call the whole world, which was Durham Big Meeting, the Miners' Gala. That was where all of us, all the families in the different collieries came together. We all met. We all knew how hard the life was in a mining village. We all knew and respected each other. And that was our world. That was our day. Like my Aunt May, my great aunt really, my mum's aunt, she was in a home in Easington, and Merrick House was run by the Durham Edge Miners Homes. And every year on Big Meeting Day, we would go, start at the bottom end of the colliery, and we would get the bus up. But when you got to old people's homes, the buses would stop, the band got out and played a tune, right? Now we got to Merrick House this day, and we got out, and incidentally, that's the day when one of the union men said to me, they played Gresford, and I was crying, and one of the lads said, "Heather Wood crying? Never seen you cry, never thought you were hard as nails." But anyway, my Aunt May came out, and my mum, she grabbed my mum's arm, and they were dancing to the music, just doing like a reel in the street to the music, and she was shouting, "It's Durham Day today, it's our day. You can do what you like today. You can stand on your head if you want." And that epitomises our world. That was how us all together we could fight the world. And that's why it's so important now for Durham Big Meeting. So that was the world that we were brought up in, caring, sharing. And to me, that's what socialism is. It's about being equal to each other. I mean, this Black Lives Matter is very important to me. I wish I could have been out on the streets, but others are doing it for us. But we care about everybody and everything. Animals, all the creatures of the earth. We care about the earth. We care about the planet. And that's, the environment, the future for our children, our grandchildren. Socialism is, the basic thing to me is care. Then you've got share, and equality comes up here somewhere. So there's those three things: care, share, equality. We'll never get total equality to my mind. But I think the gap could be a lot narrower, a hell of a lot narrower. Some people, when you say you're a socialist, they say, "Oh, you're a communist then." Well, I'm not a bloody communist, because communism, in the way, because they look straight at Russia. And Russia, to me, when it was communist, it was state capitalism. It wasn't true socialism. So my background, being in a mining village and seeing all this around us, helped me to form the opinion that you do need to care for each other. My mum and dad taught us. I heard them talking politics, and they taught me values, they taught me respect for each other, they taught me be caring and be sharing. And I was part of a bigger family. My mum's family were a big family in Easington, well known, one of the first families that came to Easington. So socialism was always important. It did me no favours in some ways, because it made me stubborn, it made me fight, it made me want to get out there and do things. And I really think that was in us from being about 5. I remember at least twice walking out of school because I thought fairness had gone out of the window. And a 5-year-old to walk out of school is, to me, a big thing. So it was there from when I was very small, grew up with it, went out canvassing with my mum for Manny Shinwell. I can remember, I mean, she used to drag us out, but rain, hail or shine, we'd be out canvassing and singing and dancing in the street. Vote, vote, vote for Manny Shinwell. Who's that knocking at the door? If it's Labour, let him in. If it's a Tory, kick his shin. Vote, vote, vote for Manny Shinwell. They'd have you up now for saying kick a Tory shin, wouldn't they? But so out in the streets, then my mum was taking part in a pageant that one of the women, the Labour women, had written. And the pageant was about the suffragettes. Now, I was 11 at this time. And I went to one of the rehearsals, and all these women on the stage singing, this is how they were doing it. Cast off the shackles of yesterday. And I said, you need some oomph in it, man. And Mrs. Fletcher, the woman who wrote it, ex-teacher by chance, she said, get up there then and do it. And I did. And it's pickly soldiers in petticoats. And I love that song. When I want to aggravate John, I sing it because it's all we can't remember the words now, but we agree they're rather stupid. That's about men. As I grew older, I have to say as well, my dad sometimes gets forgotten in my history because people know my mum and know what she did. But if my dad hadn't been my dad, I wouldn't have done half, because my dad was the quiet man, but he taught us. He taught me the difference between right and wrong. He taught me about equality.
Having chatted about her early life, I decided to ask Heather about her early experiences in work and whether she was involved in trade unionism at that time in her life.
And I was what's called a unit clerk, looking after people's accounts and basically sending them nasty letters when they didn't pay. But they used to make us work weekends. We had no choice, and we had no union. Now, there was a union in the warehouse, so I decided I would go and see the union rep in the warehouse. And he said, Heather, the best thing you can do is call everybody out, and then we'll take it from there. So I did. That was my first organised strike, and I organised it. And we had a big meeting in the grounds of Janet Fraser's factory at Sunderland. And we won. We got a union, and we had a choice of whether we worked the overtime on a weekend. So that was brilliant. That's one of the only fights I've won. Mainly socialists are fighting a losing battle. We fight the same battle over and over again, as Tony Benn said. But I won that one. And then I sort of went quiet, if you can believe it, and stayed home to look after the kids. I married a man who happened to have a good job, and both of us didn't need to go to work, and I decided I want to stay home and look after the kids. Mind you, when he came in, he got the kids straight away, because to me the kids was my job, they were his pleasure. So he used to bath them and feed them and put them to bed. So we were equal. But it was a silly thing. It was a piece of land that got me back into politics. It was a mess, and I wanted something doing with it. And I thought, well, the only way to do it, Labour's in power down here, and I'm a socialist, so I'll go to their meetings. And then it just went whoosh.
Next, we spoke about politics and how things were different for women in politics at the time Heather became active.
I've always been outspoken because I think that you should be able to speak your mind without hurting people's mind. I would never intentionally hurt anybody. But I joined the women's section because at that point we had women's sections in the Labour Party, which had quite a bit of clout. And me not being, I wasn't in a union at that time, and most of the men were in the NUM and they were going off to summer schools and all sorts. But the women's section of the Labour Party was very strong. They sent us to schools. We used to go weekend at Gilsland, Spa, and a full week at a school at Cloughton, just outside of Scarborough, Cober Hill. And all we did was politics. That was where I first met Jeremy Corbyn. And he's never changed. He's always been the same person. So, and I want to mention, and she should be mentioned, Renee McManus, who was the secretary of our women's section. She was a wonderful woman who pushed me to do things that I probably would never have done. She said, I'll put your name forward for this. You're going to do that. And she always used to say, don't say, would somebody move the meeting open? It's your meeting. If you're the chair, it's your meeting. It's not somebody else. It's just little things like that that remind. But she was a woman who, for a time, she was born with a bad disability and she couldn't go to school. Mm-hmm. So she was self-taught. And what a brain that woman had. She was a politician if ever there was, and she was a good socialist, really. So I wish there was something there to remember Renee McManus. She's brilliant, and I thank her. The women's section taught me a lot. I went to Ruskin College in Oxford to learn about the press and the media, dealing with the press and the media. That was a great experience. And later on, I won a scholarship, which was funny because there was only so many scholarships about, so, and most of them were in Britain. And one was in, bloody hell, my mind's gone. Where did I go? Geneva. It was in Geneva. And I remember saying to John, I'll get one. It's just down the road at Middlesbrough somewhere. Anyway, the letter came and it was Geneva. And it was like, Jesus Christ, I'm running up and down the hall. I'm getting Geneva, I'm getting Geneva. And then it goes, how am I going to get there? I'd never flown before. We'd always, when I was little, we went on holiday, we toured Europe in the car. My dad drove all the way, so we went over by ferry. I'd been everywhere by car, but never been by air. And John goes, why, take you a bloody long time to get to sail there, so, you know, you better go by plane. And I did it. That was a hell of an experience. But again, it was because of what the women's section taught us. We had local lessons on how to be the chair of a meeting, how to be a secretary, how to be a delegate, the meaning of being a delegate. And then we had area women's councils. So the Eastern District would have its own, Sedgefield had its own. And then on top of that, we had the Northern Women's Section, Women's Council. And I somehow, on my sins, became chair of that. It was one of the Jubilee years. And I mean, it was a massive thing. The thing that gets us about it though, you had a chain. And everybody's name got put on that chain. And I don't know where that chain is now. It would be lovely to find it. I wrote to regional office, but never even got any word back. Might have changed now since people have changed up there. So women's section taught me a lot. My mum and dad, listening to John talking about things that have been happening on site. I mean, he would come home every Monday on a new job, start a new job Monday. He'd come home by about dinner time because they were on strike arguing for the better bonus. was just amazing. So all those things taught me that the workers weren't being treated fairly and our families were losing out. But looking back, I think John and I came from the luckiest generation because we had parents who worked, we had parents who were able to take us on holiday, we had an NHS, and I say had because it's almost gone now. We had everything, and now it's been taken away, and I look at the younger people in the party, and I look at my own children and grandchildren, and I think, you're going to be losing out on so much, so much. I look at free prescriptions, you know, prescriptions were free. Tony Blair brought them back in though, didn't he? That was the sad thing. I can remember that day saying, fancy a Labour government. So people, we were in a fairer society. First of all, we were in a socialist society because we were in a colliery village. Then we were in a fairer society because there were more things that we could do. No.
Some of my favourite stories that Heather tells are those about the time she was at Durham County Council, both as a worker and as a representative of Easington for Durham County Council. So we discussed those times.
But I joined the union there and became quite active in the union. From there, I went to work for probation. If you notice, all socialist type things, housing, probation, where I worked with some really brilliant lads and lasses who were offenders, who I quite liked, got along with, that just took the wrong path. They weren't bad people, that took the wrong path. But I also worked with sex offenders and big time criminals as well, which was really challenging most of the time. But again, it brought into play my socialist values. Treat somebody how you want to be treated, and you get back what you give. And then I decided I would go on to the council. But to me, county council was a job. It wasn't sort of a sideline. It was something that if you do, it was a big thing. You had to do it full time. So I gave up my job and went to the council. And that's when I really saw change in the world. It was not the best of experiences. Well, for a start, the election, it was odd. I don't know whether we can even let this story go out, but it's the truth. The selection procedure, I was nominated, and the NUM nominated somebody. Well, usually the NUM's got the most votes. So we thought, oh, I've lost, where I've stood. And I remember hearing a woman, incidentally, say, well, you've got to vote for the man, haven't you? I went, oh, one worst enemies. I can see her now with a hat on and sitting ever supreme, probably, we've got to vote for the man. But anyhow, I remember one lad, a miner, and we were sat outside, and he was a member of the Socialist Worker Party. And he said, Heather, if you don't get the nomination, you want to stand as independent. I said, I can't do that. Man, I'm a socialist, I'm in the Labour Party, I can't do it. Anyway, I won the bloody vote, didn't I? It was a secret ballot, so obviously some people didn't vote the way they were meant to, but I won the ballot. But then what happened, a lot of the local members of the party wouldn't canvass. So my dad, who, as I've told you before, he was the person who was the quiet socialist at home. He became my agent, and some really good friends from other areas came and helped us. And we were fighting the Liberals because by then Easington was a Liberal seat. and there was some dirty stuff. I mean, there's stuff going on now. Nothing's changed. They're just doing the same as they did then. And at one point I had to get our solicitor, and I said to him, what about slander or libel or something? And he said, Heather, it'll cost you a fortune. He says, but give me the names and addresses of all the people who were saying these things. I did. And he went to see them all and told them what might happen. Not another word was said. Got to county. First election I lost. Well, I didn't win it. I got the Liberal majority down to 13. And really we should have had another recount the next morning, but we didn't. At the recount, at the count, I remember I never, well, you know me, very rare I'm dressed. I'm not what I call a prissy person. I like to just be casual and be me. But I'd got dressed and I had these bloody shoes on and I took them off. I think you've heard this one before. I took them off and I was walking around and the returning officer got up on the stage and over the mic he said, would Mrs. Wood please put her shoes back on? We can't have this. And I thought, bloody hell. And then I overheard, because I was going, I should have left my jeans on. I should have put my jeans on. And this woman who actually lived in Easton, she was on the count. And she said, I heard her say, we can't have our councillor dressing in jeans. Now, don't people go on about how councillors think there's something? Well, it's not because the councillors think there's something. It's because people make them out as if there's something. So I wasn't supposed to dress differently, anything. Anyway, I made it to county. Through the front door. I just got through the front door in the main foyer. And a man, I think he's dead now, he was the, I think it wasn't the secretary, it was the deputy leader. He came over to me. I'd never met him in my life, didn't know him. And he put his arm around me and he pulled me down and pulled his head to mine. And he said, we've heard about you before you've come. If you keep your mouth shut, you'll get everything. If you open it, you'll get nothing. So I thought, what the hell, where am I going here? So I went home and I said to me, Mum, where's my dad? She says, he's up the garden. So I'm off up the garden, but he's my dad coming down. And I told him what had happened. I said, what do you think? He says, you know what I think and you know what's right. You stick to your principles, whatever happens. And I think he was right. Because if we got nothing, the people of Easton would understand that it was because it wasn't through me not fighting for it. But anyhow, I went and I remember somebody saying to us, have two aims when you get on. Have a couple of aims that you're going to fight for. And one was, I don't know if everybody would remember, we had split-site comprehensive schools. Well, I was a governor on one of those. And I knew that they never worked. It wasn't right. There was lots of reasons. So I went to see the education officer and I said, I want you to get, because then you see, I don't know if it's the same now, but then the councils didn't make the policy. The officers wrote the reports and the councils agreed the reports. So I thought, right, I'll not go to the group, I'll go to the officer. I said, I want one-site schools on the agenda and I want Easton in top. Not being parochial, or it's the truth. And we got it. I got it. The officer put the report forward. It was agreed, and Easton School got rid of their split-site school straight away. So then I confronted them and said, I got 4 councillors to sign saying that we wanted to discuss politics at the Labour group. And I remember vividly the then chair of the group, he stood up, and I always describe him as like, if you see a red balloon getting blown up, well, his face was like that red balloon. And he said, he was banging on the table, I've been in this Labour Party since 1900 and whatever it was. and I've never come across this. We talk politics all the time. Who is the person that's causing this trouble? So I put my hand up and said, it's me. I didn't want to cause a problem. I've just been here 2 years and we've never discussed anything political. We've discussed officers' reports, but not from a political perspective. Well, my name was Maud. I didn't win. But there was another time I remember, and it's funny because I met this man's, well, I haven't met him, on Facebook. I became friends with this man's son who now lives down south. And every year for the Queen's Garden Party, I had a rota which councillor went. And this year it was this man. And I happened to put forward a resolution that whoever went paid their own way. If they want to go to the garden party, they pay. Why should we have to pay from the council? And he stood up and he said, well, it's not really for me, it's for the wife. She'll get a new dress and a hat. Can you just imagine what I did? Oh my God, I went light. But outvoted again. Outvoted again. I remember as well, it was funny with the opposition. One lady, we had there was a separate ladies' room to what there was a gentleman's, like a retiring room. And we got served coffees like a different world, waited on hand and foot. But I used to sit in the male members' room. And at this point, we were doing alterations to the toilets at County Hall. And the women and the women's room, so we had to sit in the male. So this woman councillor, she's saying, what they're doing to the toilets, the ladies' toilets, where she was independent. And I said, no, it wasn't. It was Alan who said, he says, Heather, what's going on? I go, just go with us, Alan. I said, oh, we're just going to have one lot of toilets, unisex toilets. And this woman, independent, she said, unisex toilets, we can't. No, we can't have that. And I'm saying, once you've seen one, you've seen them all, man. And she went to the chief executive of the council. He rang me, he says, Heather, what have you been saying to her? And I told him they were in kinks. He says, she's gone night. She thinks that it was a reality. But that's just some of the funny things. But the atmosphere, you can't, to make up for this fact that I was like 12 miles away from the village I represented, and I was in this cushioned environment 5 days a week. I came home and I visited every old person's home at least once a month. I went into the clubs. I remember going in the Colliery Club bar and my mother saying, hey, our Heather's gone in the bar. He's gone in the bar. 1986. I goes, Mother, they're people who voted for me. I've got to go where they are, you know. So that was me compensating for the fact that you could just so easily. And for instance, a man you know very well, who I met at one of the dinners a few months ago. I remember when he came on the council, I says, oh, I've got an ally. He's another one for the left. Great. And we went in a meeting and I can't remember what the vote was. But I remember being so upset because he voted for something I knew he didn't believe in. And when he came out of the meeting, I said to him, why did you vote like that? He says, well, now he owes me a vote. So you've got to learn how to play the game. And I said, but it isn't a game. This is people's lives we're dealing with. And that's how they treat it, as a game. And I will never, ever understand that. But anyhow, I hadn't been there 5 minutes and I got called into the Labour Group office. Me and this young lad, I was the youngest woman and he was the youngest man. And we got told, he wore Doc Martens. He had a lovely suit on and everything, but he had Doc Martens on. And he got told he shouldn't wear Doc Martens to come to County Hall. And I was dressing too casual. So I should wear something more formal. So I went out and I bought the same casual clothes, but in the brightest, horrible colours that I would never normally wear. This horrible shitty green, a yellow, bright yellow, blue, I mean, socks, everything, you know, socks, shoes, bag, jumper, trousers, the lot. And I marched in like that. It was just amazing to see the faces. I thought, nobody ever said anything more about my clothes.
What most people know Heather for best is the leadership role she played within her community during the miners' strike. We spoke about this, how she came to be in the position where she was a community leader, and how the community worked together using socialism to try and overcome the challenges they faced at the hands of a hostile Tory government.
I became, for my sins, I don't know how the hell I got it, but I was the chair of the constituency. At the, I think I got it 2 years before the strike, and I kept it for 3 in the end. And we knew what was happening. We knew then, at least a year before, that Thatcher was going to close the pits, and we had to do something. So we decided as a constituency that we would set up a group, which would involve shopkeepers, Tories, Liberals, whoever, because we were frightened for the community. And that organisation would then go out to educate the public in whatever way we could, meetings, leaflets, whatever, to let them understand and recognise even that the Tories were going to do this. Because at that time people thought, oh no, that's why people came from the inland pits to the coast, because they're there forever. You know, there's still plenty coal, it's profitable, they're not going to shut out pits. So we set up an organisation called Save Easington Area Mines. And it was a huge success. I can't think of any Tories that were on it, like, but there were some shopkeepers came along, Chamber of Trade, things like that. And we had what was at that time the biggest rally outside of miners' banners outside of Durham Big Meeting. And we had it in Easington. And Arthur spoke, and I'm chairing the meeting on the platform. It was a great experience because it was our community together, fighting together. And then, as the time went on, the strike was, you could tell we were going to have to strike, we were going to have to stand up. But the strange thing for me was, my husband didn't work at the pit. All my family did. John was the first one in his family that didn't. But I wanted to fight because I knew how important our community was. And we should all be fighting as one to save that. It wasn't just about jobs, as important as they were. It was about a whole lifestyle, whole attitude to life. And I have to be honest and say, I wanted somebody to get Margaret Thatcher. That was so. There was 2 reasons. Personally, I was involved. And the strike came, and I was just reading my cousin's diaries. Her husband was on strike, and she's got, met our Heather down the street today. She says that the strike's going to last at least a year. Oh my God, I hope it doesn't. Those words stick in my mind. But my meaning then was, I don't think I really thought a year, but that we had to instill in ourselves that we had to survive for as long as a year. Because if we said a month and it's over, we got to that month, depression sets in. You have to keep motivated. So we said a year. And I remember the scene committee saying, well, what can we do now? We continue on like the politics of it and getting leaflets out and everything. And I said, well, I think we've got to get the women involved. You get the women involved, they are the backbone of the mining communities. They are the people who, at the end of the day, make all the decisions in our communities. And usually they let the men think that they had, but they'd done it. The women were the ones who had gone out and fought in years gone by when we wanted bathrooms in the colliery housing. It was the women who went out and blockaded the streets, the main street, stopped the coal lorries going up, because it was colliery houses and we wanted bathrooms in them. And I can remember seeing the pushchairs and the prams on the street blockading. Every time there was something, it was the women who went out. So I said, we need to get women involved. And there was 3 of us had a meeting in our house. We were delegated to do this. And we put together a letter to the women. But we didn't know, and at that time, we were told by the miners that they didn't have a list of where every miner lived. So we just had to do a leaflet for every house in Easington district. And we invited women to a meeting at the council offices. And the council chamber was packed. It was brilliant, absolute great response. And from there we said, would these women go back to their villages and organise something in each village? You know, get a few women together and we'd have like an umbrella organisation, Seam Relief Fund, we called it, Sadie's and Area Mines Relief Fund. And each of those groups in each village would come together to the Relief Fund group, and we would sort of make any rules. That very few rules we had, but we did have. One of them was that any money raised in your own village, you kept. Any money raised outside your village had to go into the central pot, and it was shared between all of us. And so these women did that and got in touch with me and said, we've got something organised. I said, well, you need to go to the union, not to ask permission, but to tell them what you're going to do so we don't duplicate. And they didn't want to go. So I had to go to every bloody union meeting. It was a time in my life when I think I was the most stressed ever. And I think it's the time when I gave the most, because I remember at the end thinking, well, when you give your all and you haven't won, how can you win when you're not giving your all? And that really got me down. But anyhow, I went to Easington meeting first, and we weren't allowed into the meeting. I had to discuss whether they were going to let us in, 2 women. There'd been no women in, even though there were women members of the NUM that hadn't gone to the union meetings. So we sat outside like 2 taties waiting. And Billy Stubbs, brilliant union man, he was great. He came out and he said, you can come in now, Heather, it's all right. And I can see, I picture everything. These pictures are in my head exactly. I used to have a photographic memory once over, but the committee room in Easington Welfare, you walk through the door and ahead of you was the long, like boardroom table, you know, set up like a boardroom. And on the walls were photographs, and it was all men except the Queen. Queen on the miners' hall wall. And Alan Cummins sat at the far end, and I lifted my foot and I said, are you sure? Because once this foot steps in there, there's no going back. And Alan laughed, but I don't think he ever knew, or, well, he didn't realise then just how different things were going to be. Because at one point, the union, I hope somebody alive who remembers this, because some people who are alive might deny it, but it's true. The union, God, I forget, at one point, oh, that was it. The men wanted a strike committee, and the union in Easington said, no, we'll just continue with the normal committee. So the lads came to us and said, can you do something? So we picketed the lodge meeting and gave the lodge committee leaflets to go in with. And again, They came out and invited us in and said, would we agree if, would we take it back to the men and say that the Lodge Committee were prepared to have joint meetings with us, the women. Would they be happy enough with that? So we did. We went out to the men agreed. They were happy with us going in because they knew we would tell them. But that didn't stop the union having separate meetings when we didn't know it was going on. But anyhow, went round each of the, even went to Dave Ayre's house. Do you know Dave Ayre? Lovely bloke, great socialist, absolutely brilliant fella. He's still going around. I remember at Thatcher's funeral, he walked in the Colliery Club. I go, hey, it's Dave Ayre. I thought you were dead, Dave. I mean, what a thing to say to somebody. But went to his house up at Crook, and they set up a support group up there, food parcels. Anyhow, our how we got started straight away was Dave Temple. There was another great friend. I call him my brother. He's my brother. He came to, he was one of the people who was on the same committee and helped me put the letter together to the women. And he came to our house this night and said, Heather, I've got a car full of food. It was a fruit and veg cooperative in Durham, down by the county hotel. And everything they had left that night had rang Dave. And I says, oh yeah, we'll do something. What the hell are we going to do? You know, I haven't got a place organised yet. So I rang the secretary of the Colliery Club. And he said, yes, you can use the singing end, you can use the kitchen. Great. Rang my mother. She'd just finished work as a cook. Rang a few of the women and said, can we start tomorrow? And we did, and it went on to five hot meals a day and sandwiches and drinks for the pickets. It was very hard because we were having to raise money to feed sometimes 500-600 people a day. I look at the books and I don't know how we did it. Incidentally, all of this information is in Beamish under a collection. It's called the Heatherwood Collection. So all the books and everything for anybody interested, it's all there. The minutes of every meeting. So that first day I said to the lasses, don't lift your head up. Just serve, don't lift your head up, because people are proud. They'll think people are going to go out and say, oh, Joe Bloggs was up for his dinner today. And they're not like that. So I came in, I was at work, and I came in at the lunchtime, and everybody, the men, it was only men came the first day, the men had their heads down, all the women serving had their heads down. It was like a bloody funeral. It changed dramatically, because we called them in our area free cafes, not soup kitchens. It wasn't just soup kitchen implies you had soup every day. We had a menu for the week, and so did many of the other cafes. And we set it up like a cafe. It was served properly. Like I say, that's something different every day. Tony Blair came one day before he was anybody or somebody. And he brought Pat Phoenix and her husband, Tony. And they had pie and peas, and I remember charging them £10 each for the pie and peas. But it came from there. I was doing all the talking at the meetings, the big meetings, and I said to them, I'm getting tired. We're all going to have to take turns. But the majority had never done anything like that before. So I said, but you're going to have to do it. So we put the names in a hat. When it was your turn, you did your bit. And Diane Vout, who is another lovely woman, she's a very quiet spoken person, not very outgoing, and she worked for British Coal, as did her husband. So they were both on strike and had two girls. And it was her turn to speak. And it was at Middlesbrough, the biggest rally yet. Tony Benn was speaking, and it was Diane. And all she did, she stood up and she said, I work for British Coal and so does my husband. We're both on strike. We have two children. Can you help us? well, she got a standing ovation. It was just, and that girl, she didn't go to be this outgoing politician or whatever. She was the same, but she was different in that she seemed more self-confident. She ended up going to Greenham with us, and she said, "I'm going to Greenham with Heather. There's not even a toilet. Not even a toilet." And that's how aware a lot of people were, or unaware. But we got money from all over the world. Every letter that we got during that year-long strike, our captain is in Beamish. And Willy Brandt, who was the Chancellor of Germany at the time, sent letters. Families from Australia, New Zealand, some with connections with mine and some with no connections. Our local vicar, Tony Hodgson, who was a great man, he wrote to the Church Times, and we got money in from there. And I regained a friendship with one of our old vicars, Mr. Culver. He sent us some money and sent a lovely letter because he used to look after us at church. He was a great fella. I have to say, I've come across some absolutely fantastic people, come across some bastards, mind, who professed to be socialist, but if we'd had a Tory council, they'd have been standing as Tory. But met some really good people. So, and Mr. and Mrs. Cherry, who are both dead now, 97 Ovedale Road, Enfield, Essex. That was their address. Now, I can remember that all those years later. That's how important those people were in our lives. They must have had the biggest loft in their house in the whole world, because they would send a letter. Heather, we found this in the loft. Heather, we found some boxes of material in the loft. Would you be able to use it if we sent it up? They sent boxes, great big boxes of material. Now, we gave it to people to make things, and we sold those things. School colours she asked for, and she found some wool in the loft that would just so happen to be the school colours. Knit hats and scarves and knits. And this day, Mr. rang me and he said, "Heather, we've noticed all your letters are handwritten," because I thanked everybody individually. I said, "Yeah." He says, "We found a typewriter in the loft. It needs looking at. If we get it seen to, would you be happy for us to send it up?" And they sent it up. So the rest of my letters were all typed. And we kept in touch for years after the strike. If you go down Hazen Main Street and you talk to any of the women and you ask them about Mr. and Mrs. Cherry, "Oh, we never met them. I asked to meet them and they said, no, we don't want to spoil the illusion." But that's the sort of friendships that we struck up during the strike. Somebody called Bev Wood, I think it was Birmingham he lived, and he used to send £1 out of his pension every week. I mean, that was a lot of money then. And out of a pension, children sent the pocket money. London, our twin town, Greenwich, they came up with about 6 busloads one day. It filled the Colliery Club lounge. Everything was in. Brand new shoes, clothes, food, everything. And my dad came down from the garden this day and he stood in the middle. He was crying, breaking his heart. I said, "What are you crying for, Dad?" He says, "If Thatcher could see this, she would be scared of us all." Because with all that help, we could win. At that time, we felt we could win.
So that brings us to the end of part 1 of this video. If you're anything like me, you'll have found it absolutely fascinating. And there are so many stories of socialist solidarity in there. We look forward to bringing you part 2 of the interview, where we explore further what happened during the miners' strike, as well as other events in Heather's life. Please join us for the second part.